Alright, I thought I would give a beat down on the left that I wrote somewhere. And basically, someone mentioned that the left are absolutely, literally shaking in their boots about ICE, but they follow ICE around all the time. And this gave rise to a series of thoughts. So basically, in response to this, I started talking, and basically what I said is, the left is the left because it's a messy, disjointed ordering of values and conceptualizations. They're not well put together people. And what I mean by that is, facing an enemy when they haven't divided and conquered you is better than being the last victim who fed the others to the crocodile through appeasement. So that's the initial reason for it. But they legitimately don't understand that Trump isn't just trying to destroy them all as individuals for existing. And thus, they don't understand the people that support Trump cracking down on them for being psycho dumbasses. It's Chihuahua syndrome. Vicious as pit bulls or chihuahuas, with just as much awareness of the big dogs getting annoyed as either. And no concept of danger because they think they're warriors when they're civilians. They think a slap is as dangerous as a punch in a sense, and that their neurotic violence is as justified as much or more than stronger people's measured punishment of them. Another way, other than Chihuahua syndrome, is spoiled brat syndrome. They've never been spanked. They're equally focused. They're so equality focused, they forget their betters are actually their betters in a hierarchy, and surround themselves with equally worthless people in a fight, specifically, and in general. They have no consciousness for their rung of the ladder on a hierarchy. They don't know their place, and they sure as hell don't like the idea that anyone could be better than them who disagrees with them. They're perpetual children. They have the same level of self-control as one as well, which is why they're so dangerous when they're given armies, cops, and guns. And they do money stuff, the economy, similar to children as well. 1 Oreo now instead of 10 in an hour. That's why deficit spending is so insane. They have no sense of self-sacrifice. If they have to spend half a nation's budget to stay alive for like literally an hour longer, they'll do it. And because they surround themselves with equally worthless people just to not see their own flaws, because that would require them having to work on those flaws, they can't imagine stronger people actually caring about them at all, which drives the neurotic violence and paranoia and grasps for power because all their equally shitty associates, friends, colleagues, and comrades don't have a moral backbone. All of their talk of cooperation is their disjointed unconscious desire for what better put together people have achieved, while also desiring people to feed them, and I don't mean this through welfare exactly, but which I think has a certain validity to it in a sense. There's a certain validity to welfare to a degree. But I mean feed them in the ego and the beyond basic welfare sense. Despite being shittily flawed to the nines, which means absolutely flawed, without putting any work into bettering themselves because they have no faith in their own potential. So they're very unevolved, lower vibrational, lower frequency people in the hippie cosmic crystal sense. And they don't see that other people are better put together through hard work and discipline and ruthlessness towards their own flaws, and that's why they're better off. They don't understand, or maybe they subconsciously understand that working on yourself to make yourself a better person, who also punishes evil specifically while doing good, requires a certain degree of honesty about your own flaws that are natural to a person. This is the absolute left, not the left that I'm talking about in my other videos sometimes when I talk of their validity as leftists. It's the purity of leftism that's the problem, in a sense, in regards to the direction of travel towards lowest common denominator. And the obsession with keeping people at the lowest common denominator. And the problem with them is they would rather a backstabbing, power-hungry, incompetent group be in power because they refuse to work on themselves to get better, so they can't function when other people are working on themselves, so they sabotage other people's attempts to get better. And basically, the general trend is, if you sabotage every attempt to get better like crabs in the bucket, then no one will get better, and everyone's living in shit. But if more people aim towards the highest, what one will find is typically the highest involves increased cooperation in a certain sense. There are limitations, and there's in-groups and out-groups, but when you're in the in-group, you cooperate more, and there's layers to cooperation as you progress from the center to the external. And this is just natural. This is a proper ordering of the world. And what they've mistakenly done, in a sense, it worked for a while, but it's not a useful long-term strategy, which is the childhood part of it, which they're not thinking ahead, is that basically the leftist paradigm works when people are willing to bow to it, and there's no one competing against you. But it's a very sabotage-oriented belief structure. Now, sabotage is basically when someone who is weaker does something that is sneaky to make someone who is stronger less powerful. And there might be a validity to that in raw power dynamics in regards to tyrants and stuff like that. Like literally the Jews working in factories sabotaging Nazis' bombs to drop on Britain. But you can't build a civilization off of sabotage. That's how you destroy a civilization. And building requires self honesty and acknowledging your flaws very openly and working on them. That's how you get better. Now, I said earlier that the left has a purpose in society, which is that the certain toleration levels of imperfection. But you notice how I also was saying that the left is supposed to be subordinate to the right? So the primary drive is aiming higher and higher, while the secondary drive is accepting you will never gain true perfection, basically, roughly put. Now, I have my own theology about perfection in heaven and what that means and stuff like that, but basically, that's the in this universe or world or life kind of explanation of it. And that is the proper order of the universe. And that's why leftism is so bad and why it's unnatural, basically. It's infantilization perpetually instead of doing the hard work of becoming a better person. Now, the right can get a little perfectionistic, and that's not necessarily the best thing, which is why the left has a place, but I subordinate the left's place as secondary to the right's aiming higher to avoid perfectionism, by saying the left is secondary to accept you will never be actually perfect in this world or life or whatever. But you should aim towards perfection or the highest or highness. As a general rule, towards upwards and onwards, like Jordan Peterson says. So you're not totally ruthless with people that are behind you who are moving forwards. But you're also not saying going backwards is acceptable or stagnating is acceptable. You know, unless it's aging. Because some people get dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. And the point is to grow your entire life as much as possible, intellectually and mentally and spiritually and stuff. You know, so that you have something of value to teach the next generations, so they can grow and stuff like that. You know, it's like an evolutionary process from RNA strands that are like viruses in the sort of barely count as living sense up to the highest life forms with consciousness and awareness and stuff like that, like humans. There's a evolutionary path that we don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen, but the general trend is towards consciousness for the higher life forms. And there's a lot of repetition in humans of growing up, basically, and then trusting in the evolutionary trend to enable us to grow up higher degrees over time and live longer. But it's a slow process, so we just have to keep the process going of cycles until natural selection just catches up with our technological level. And that's the thing. Now, the patrician highest wisdom is that our evolution coexists with our technological advancement. But in a simpler sense, we're just keeping the cycles of growing up consistent and strong, so that the natural trend is that those who do it the most have the most children, and evolution takes over, and the mutations work in the favor of the direction of increased awareness and so on. And what happens is people get an idea of what upper levels of performance are without actually being at the level of performance. And that's called a fetish, basically, as per Slavoj Zizek or something. And the real evolution of an individual is in the particulars and the principles combined. So you take the particulars and you apply principles that are lined up with the stuff more or less consistently in the principles. So it's not all about coming up with theories, and it's not all about coming up with like solving the details here and there. It's about combining solutions that deal with the principles and theories, beauty and elegance, with the actualities of the specific incidents or details or particulars. And that's what it means to say science is that which is as simple as it can be while being accurate. And that's increasing in an increasingly technologicalized society. And our natural selection evolution is supposed to catch up with that biologically. But you notice how technology makes life easier, so there's a counterbalance to the pure growth of capacity element. And what the leftists are is they're focusing on childishness and so on. And that's why they don't want to have children of their own, because they don't want the responsibility of dealing with a life that is reliant on them, and the responsibility and the work. But you will find ultimate meaning through responsibility, personal responsibility, and personal sacrifice for the sake of the future. And that's what children are the embodiment of, basically. Like, literally, they're the body of that process and concept and development process and so on. And that's why the great filter continues, and natural selection is supreme. So those who are unfit self-select typically into hedonism and lack of children more often than those who select for future benefits and gains and so on. Now the thing is, there is a sort of cutting off of the unworthy, in a sense, but there's also an incorporation of the potential of the unworthy at the moment and possibly worthy later, that also coincides with the strict you're good at it and they're bad at it kind of element. So there's an expansion of the franchise to a certain extent. It's not total, but it's increasing. And that's just part of the functionality of humanity and so on. And there's a certain truth to the element, the concept that those who are the most functional include more people than others. But at the same time, it's not like a one-sided thing. There's a certain exclusion element of the unworthy at the most basic level. And there's a constant testing of the waters of which one you are, and pushing for development so that you find your fullest potential. And that's why the right is superior in a sense, but the left has a purpose in its secondary nature. So it's saving what you can and allowing what is best to rule. And that's the right approach to it for consistency. Anyways, that's all I got for now.